They shoved the metal tray across the mess hall, the stench of slop and fear filling the air. Two inmates locked eyes across the room, one hungry for scraps, the other hungry for dominance. Suddenly, fists flew. Chairs smashed. Guards yelled. In the middle of it all, stale food, broken rules, and raw terror. This is the moment when prison food, fights and fear collide, what life is really like inside. And what happens next will shock you. Arrival, misery and the first bubble of trouble. It was a cold morning when 28-year-old Mike, alias, arrived at the high-security wing of a U.S. state prison. He was nervous, unsure what to expect. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, the corridors were narrow, and the clank of steel doors seemed endless. He signed in, grim-faced guards directed him, and he was shown his small cell. A bunk, a steel toilet, a sink, minimal, stark. His first meal came that evening. They handed out a tray, a watery stew, white bread so soft it felt like sponge, and a tiny piece of processed meat. He thought, this is prison food? The taste was messy, the portion small, and the feeling of shame washed over him. Others around him exchanged glances. This wasn't just bad, it was demoralizing. In the next few days, things got worse. The same slop for dinner night after night. Some inmates were lucky, they got slightly better meals by working jobs or being in the right group. Others weren't. Whispers moved through the dorm, if you skip your job, you get less food. If you ask for more, you get locked down. The fear grew. Mike also noticed tension bubbling. Someone took the last roll of bread at breakfast, another guy grabbed it first. A fight almost broke out, but guards intervened before fists flew. The message was clear, food is currency. Control is power. Then came that night. The alarms didn't sound beforehand, one moment everything was quiet, the next chaos erupted. A group of inmates in the dining hall started yelling. One tray got thrown across a table. Chairs flipped. Fists flew. Guards rushed in, shouting orders. Mike watched from the side, stomach twisting as the smell of the food tray hit him again, now mixed with sweat and panic. A guard grabbed one man and dragged him off, his face bloody, his friend screaming. And then, the worst, one inmate grabbed a piece of bread and chucked it like a projectile. The target, the guard. The guard responded with force, the fight exploded. What happens right after this exploded moment? That's where we go next. The aftermath and the lesson of fear. The next morning, the entire prison felt different. The air was heavier, the silence sharper. Every man in that cell block knew something had changed after last night's food hall brawl. Mike woke to the sound of boots, guards doing random searches that were anything but random. They tore through cells, flipped mattresses, scattered papers, and dumped trays of instant noodles on the floor. The message was clear, don't ever let that happen again. Those who fought were dragged to solitary confinement, the hole. For 23 hours a day, they'd sit in total isolation. One of them, a man named Reggie, was rumored to have started the fight after another inmate snatched his cornbread. A small thing, but in prison, small things mean everything. Food isn't just food. It's respect, survival, and identity. Mike sat quietly in his cell, watching the guards storm by. He wasn't part of the fight, but guilt crept up on him anyway. He'd seen it coming. The tension, the hunger, the look in Reggie's eyes before he snapped, it all made sense now. Fear wasn't just about fights. It was about what happened after. At lunch that day, the atmosphere in the chow hall was different. Everyone ate in silence. No jokes, no eye contact, just the sound of spoons hitting trays. The slop on the plate, gray, tasteless, and cold, felt like punishment. The guards stood taller than usual, batons in hand, eyes sharp. When the fight happened, Mike had been terrified of the violence. But now, he realized what was worse, the calm that came afterward. Nobody trusted anyone. Not even friends. Everyone knew, one wrong word, one wrong glance, and you could be the next man dragged to solitary. That night, Mike heard it through the vents, whispers between cells. Reggie's still in the hole. Yeah, and they cut his food in half. He's losing it in there. Mike couldn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling, the same gray color as the mush they called dinner. He started to understand what life really was inside these walls. It wasn't just the food that broke you down, it was how everything around it was designed to remind you that you had no control. Then, one morning, as Mike lined up for breakfast, something new happened. A guard called his name. Johnson. You got kitchen duty. Kitchen duty. It sounded harmless, but inside, every inmate knew that was where the real power of prison was. Food meant everything. And Mike was about to learn that firsthand. The kitchen door swung open, the heat and smell hit him instantly. Pots boiling, trays clanging, men moving fast. Behind the steam and chaos, a group of older inmates watched him closely. One of them smiled, but not in a friendly way. "Welcome to the kitchen, rookie," the man said, voice low. "You feed us right, you'll live easy. Mess up, you'll wish you were back in your cell." That was Mike's first day behind the serving line. And before it was over, he'd already made his first mistake, one that would cost him more than a tray of food. The kitchen code and the price of a mistake. The first thing Mike noticed in the prison kitchen wasn't the heat, it was the hierarchy. There were rules here, unwritten ones, and breaking them could get a man hurt faster than anywhere else in the yard. The kitchen crew ran things like a street operation. Big Rico, a tall, heavy-set man with tattooed arms and a permanent scowl, was the boss. His crew, 2 lifers and a short, wiry inmate named Tiny, handled everything from portion sizes to who got extra servings. The guards didn't really control the kitchen. Rico did. Mike's job was simple: scoop the mush onto trays and keep the line moving. But even that came with danger. Because in prison, who you give extra food to, or who you don't, could decide whether you make friends or enemies. That day, Rico pulled Mike aside. "Listen, new guy," Rico said, pointing his ladle like a weapon. "You don't just serve food. You serve respect. You see that man from cell block D? He gets double. That one? None. You understand?" Mike nodded, trying to play it cool, though his heart was racing. He thought, this can't be that serious. It's just food. He'd find out soon it was everything. The lunch rush came. The line stretched long, loud voices, trays clattering. Mike was sweating under the steam, moving fast. He tried to remember who got what. But then it happened. A tall, bald inmate stepped up. "Yo, rookie," he said, tapping his tray. "You know who I am?" Mike hesitated. He didn't. "You supposed to hook me up, fool," Rico said. Mike glanced at Rico across the kitchen, but Rico wasn't looking. The inmate's face hardened. "You think I'm lying?" Mike scooped an extra spoon of beans onto his tray, just to keep the peace. The man grinned and walked off. But Rico saw. Later that night, back in the cell block, Mike felt the tension. Rico and his crew confronted him near the laundry room. The air smelled of bleach and sweat. Rico stepped close, his voice calm but deadly serious. "You gave extra beans to the wrong man," he said. "He's with another crew. You just made me look weak." Mike tried to explain, but Rico wasn't listening. Tiny slammed his fist into a locker, the sound echoing down the hall. Rico leaned in. "In here, food is power. You don't give that power away." He turned to walk off, then paused. "You'll fix it tomorrow." Mike barely slept that night. His stomach twisted with fear and regret. Tomorrow, he'd have to serve food again, and this time, one wrong scoop could mean more than punishment. It could mean blood. The next day came fast. Breakfast line, same faces, same smell of burnt toast and overcooked eggs. The tall inmate from yesterday stepped up again, smirking. "Yo, rookie. Make it right?" Mike froze. Rico was watching. Guards were watching. Every eye in the room seemed locked on that single tray. His hand trembled over the spoon. Whatever he chose next would decide which side of this prison he stood on. And that's when it happened. An unexpected shove from behind sent a tray flying. The beans hit Rico's shoes. The room went silent. Then Rico snapped. He flipped the table, shouting, "Who did that?" The entire chow hall exploded into chaos once again, food flying, fists swinging, and Mike caught right in the middle. Blood, bread, and the price of survival. The chow hall was a storm. Trays smashed against the floor, spoons clattered like metal rain, and the smell of beans and sweat mixed with pure chaos. Mike ducked as a guard yelled, "Get down!" But nobody listened. Once a fight starts in prison, control is just an illusion. Big Rico charged at the tall inmate, the one Mike had accidentally served. Rico swung hard, caught him across the jaw. The man went down, tray spinning away. Tiny jumped in next, kicking. 2 more inmates joined in. Mike froze for a split second, then instinct kicked in. He dove behind the serving counter, heart pounding. He could see guards running in, batons out, pepper spray hissing through the air. The sting hit his face even from behind the counter, it burned his eyes, his throat. He gasped for air. On the ground. "Now," a guard screamed. But the inmates didn't care. The fight wasn't about food anymore. It was about respect, about who owned the kitchen. Rico grabbed a broken tray, raised it like a weapon. Before he could swing, a guard tackled him from behind. Both crashed into a pile of spilled stew. The sound of flesh hitting metal filled the air. Mike crawled toward the corner, his shirt stained with food and sweat. His mind was racing. If I get caught standing, they'll think I was part of it. So he did what every inmate learns to do when chaos hits. He flattened himself on the floor, hands over his head, praying the storm would pass. After what felt like forever, the fight ended. Coughing inmates were lined up against the wall. Guards barked orders. Some men were bleeding, others were crying or shaking. Rico and two others were dragged out, handcuffed tight, faces pressed against the floor. Mike's name was called too. Johnson. Up. He stood slowly, eyes watering from the pepper spray. The guard looked at him like he was just another number. You're coming with us. They hauled him to a small room, cold, white walls, one metal table. Interrogation. Who started it? The officer asked. Mike hesitated. He knew the rule, snitching gets you hurt worse than fighting. But staying silent could cost him his kitchen job, or worse, land him in solitary too. He kept his voice low. I don't know. I just saw trays flying. The officer studied him, then nodded. Fine. You're off kitchen duty until we say otherwise. Back in his cell that night, Mike stared at his reflection in the metal sink. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands shaking. He could still hear the fight echoing in his ears, the sound of food trays smashing like gunshots. Days passed. Rico and his crew were gone, thrown into solitary. The chow hall went quiet again, almost too quiet. Meals became smaller, colder. The guards were stricter. But prison never stays calm for long. One evening, during dinner, a new rumor spread through the cell block: Rico's coming back from the hole. When Mike heard it, his stomach dropped. Because the last time they saw each other, food was flying, fists were swinging, and Rico had promised one thing before being dragged away. You'll pay for this, rookie. And now, he was coming back. Rico's return and the fear that followed. The day Rico came back from solitary, the entire block went silent. No shouting, no laughter, no noise, just that eerie quiet that tells you everyone's waiting for something bad to happen. Mike was in his cell, sitting on his bunk, pretending to read when he heard the metal doors open. Boots echoed down the corridor. Then came that familiar, deep voice. Back home, Rico said with a smirk. Even from inside his cell, Mike felt it, the tension, the shift in the air. Prisoners whispered through the vents, Rico's back, yo, he ain't forget, somebody's in trouble. Mike didn't need to guess who they meant. That night, during count time, he could feel eyes on him. Every time he looked up, someone was watching. Rico didn't say a word. He didn't have to. His silence was louder than any threat. Later, when the lights went out, Mike heard something scrape against his door, a soft tap, then a folded piece of paper slid through the gap. He hesitated before picking it up. Inside were just 3 words, scrawled in pencil. Kitchen. Tomorrow. Alone. His hands started shaking. He knew what that meant. The next morning, Mike barely touched his breakfast. He sat quietly, trying to figure out his options. He could report it, but in prison, that's suicide. He could skip the kitchen, but that would make him look scared, and fear is blood in the water. By noon, he decided to go. When he stepped into the kitchen, it looked the same: steaming pots, the smell of burnt beans, trays stacked high, but the energy was off. Rico was there, waiting near the back, his arms folded. 2 of his guys stood beside him, silent. Mike walked in slow, heartbeat thumping in his ears. Rico smiled faintly. Miss me, rookie? Mike swallowed hard. I didn't mean for that fight to. Rico raised a hand. Stop talking. You made me look weak. But I'm a fair man. He motioned to a tray of food on the counter. So you're gonna make it right? Mike frowned, confused. How? Rico nodded toward another inmate, a skinny kid at the far end of the line, clearly new, terrified. See him? He owes me. You're gonna serve him nothing. Not a spoon. Let him starve. Mike froze. The kid couldn't have been more than 20, barely eating sized portions since he came in. He'd already lost weight. If Mike followed Rico's order, he'd crush that kid's spirit. But if he refused, Rico would come for him. The lunch bell rang. Inmates poured in. Mike stood behind the counter, staring at the tray. The skinny kid came up, eyes tired but polite. Can I get mine? Rico's stare burned from across the room. Mike hesitated, spoon hovering over the pot. Sweat dripped down his forehead. Every muscle in his body screamed to make the right move, but which one was right in here? Finally, he scooped the smallest spoon he could and dropped it on the tray. Barely a bite. The kid looked down, disappointed, but said nothing. He just walked away. Rico grinned. Good boy, he whispered. That night, Mike couldn't sleep. He lay on his bunk, staring into the dark, hearing echoes of that kid's quiet footsteps leaving the line. He'd survived another day, but it came with a cost. Guilt. Shame. Fear. The next morning, he saw the same kid again. Only this time, something was different: bruises on his face, a limp in his walk. Word spread quick: someone had jumped him in the showers. Mike's gut twisted. He knew who had sent them. And then, later that day, as Mike passed by the showers on cleanup duty, he found something floating in the drain, a piece of torn paper, wet and smudged with soap. The words barely readable but clear enough to make his blood run cold. You're next. the threat becomes real. Mike held that soggy note in his trembling hands, the words, "You're next," bleeding across the paper. His heart pounded so hard he could feel it in his throat. He looked around the showers, empty, silent except for the slow drip of water from a rusted pipe. But he knew someone had been there not long before. Watching. Waiting. He shoved the note into his pocket and walked out fast, head down. In prison, fear spreads fast, but showing it spreads faster. He had to look calm, even when every part of him screamed otherwise. That night, he could barely eat. The dinner tray sat untouched on his bunk, mashed potatoes, some kind of meat loaf, and a roll so hard it could break glass. Across the block, Rico's crew laughed and joked like nothing was wrong. But every few minutes, Mike caught Rico glancing his way. That grin again. The kind that didn't fade. When the lights went out, Mike lay awake, listening. In prison, night isn't silent. There's coughing, whispers, footsteps, and sometimes worse, sounds you pretend not to hear. Then, sometime after midnight, came a noise that froze his blood. Clank. Someone was messing with his door. Mike sat up instantly, heart racing. The lock rattled again, then stopped. He could see the faint shape of a man outside the cell window, just standing there. Watching. "Who's there?" Mike whispered. No answer. Just that silent stare. Then, after a few seconds that felt like hours, the figure moved away. The next morning, the guards found a sharpened toothbrush, a shank, lying just outside Mike's cell door. They questioned the whole block but, of course, nobody talked. Rico didn't even look worried. In fact, he smiled the whole time. Later that day, the warden called Mike into his office. "You got enemies, Johnson?" he asked flatly, flipping through a report. Mike stayed quiet. Saying the wrong thing could get him transferred, or worse, labeled a snitch. "Someone's trying to make an example out of you," the warden said finally. "We're moving you to protective custody for now." Protective custody. It sounded safe, but in prison, it's just another kind of isolation. They moved him to a small cell, alone. No cellmate, no noise except the buzz of fluorescent lights. Meals slid under the door twice a day. Cold, tasteless, but at least he didn't have to serve it anymore. For a while, Mike thought maybe he was safe. He even started to sleep again. But the peace didn't last. One afternoon, as he was being escorted back from a brief shower, another inmate passing in the hallway whispered, "Rico ain't done with you." Mike's heart sank. Rico still had reach, even from the other side of the prison. That night, the guards did another round of meal drops. Mike lifted the tray, ready to eat, when he noticed something strange. The mashed potatoes looked darker, almost gray. He sniffed it, and immediately felt sick. There was a bitter, chemical smell underneath. He shoved the tray away just as a guard passed by. "Something wrong?" the guard asked. Mike pointed. "Smell that." The guard leaned in, sniffed, and his face hardened. Within seconds, the tray was gone, replaced with a clipboard and questions. It wasn't food poisoning. Someone had spiked his meal. The kitchen. Rico's crew still worked there. That night, lying awake under the flickering light, Mike realized there was no safe place in this prison, not even inside protective custody. Rico didn't just want to scare him. He wanted him gone. And the next morning, when the warden came to see him, his words confirmed the fear Mike had been trying not to face. "Johnson," the warden said, "we found something today. Someone scratched your name into the wall of the kitchen with an X through it." Mike went cold. Rico's message was clear. He wasn't threatening anymore. He was promising. The setup. By now, Mike had learned that prison wasn't just about survival, it was about staying one step ahead of whoever wanted to bury you. But how do you stay ahead of a man like Rico, a lifer with nothing to lose and every guard in his pocket? The warden's warning echoed in Mike's mind. "They marked your name." Every minute felt like a countdown. For days, Mike stayed locked in protective custody. No visits, no rec time, no human contact. Just silence. But isolation starts to do something to your mind. The longer he stayed alone, the more he wondered if maybe, just maybe, Rico had moved on. Then came the knock. A guard opened the slot on his cell door. "Johnson, pack up. You're being transferred." Mike blinked. Transferred? To where? "Back to general population. Orders from up top," the guard said flatly. Mike's stomach dropped. That didn't make sense, not after the poison attempt, not after the threats. But in prison, you don't argue with orders. As he walked back into the main block, the noise hit him like a wave, shouting, laughter, metal clanging. The smells, the chaos, the eyes on him. He hadn't realized how much he'd missed the noise until it scared him again. And then he saw him. Rico. Standing by the phones, arms crossed, grinning. Mike looked away fast, trying not to react, but he could feel Rico's gaze burning through him. That night, Mike's new cellmate, a quiet guy named Devin, warned him. Word is, Rico's been talking. Says you're getting what's coming to you. They say it's happening tomorrow. Tomorrow? Mike asked, voice low. Yup. Kitchen shift. Breakfast run. Devin leaned closer. Don't go near the back storage. That's where it's supposed to happen. Mike's chest tightened. He knew it was true. Rico still controlled the kitchen, even from the shadows. He stayed up all night, thinking. There were only two options. Go into the kitchen and hope he makes it out alive. Find a way to stop Rico before Rico stops him. At dawn, the guards came to escort the kitchen crew, and somehow, Mike's name was still on the roster. When he entered, everything looked normal, steam rising from pots, metal trays clanging, the smell of instant eggs. But the tension was thick. He saw Rico at the far end, pretending to wipe a counter. Tiny was stacking trays nearby. Mike's pulse raced. Every sound echoed too loud, the hiss of the stove, the scrape of boots on the floor. He grabbed a ladle and moved to the serving line, eyes darting to every corner. Minutes passed. Nothing happened. Maybe Devin was wrong. Then the lights flickered. When they came back on, Tiny was gone. So were two other inmates. Rico was nowhere to be seen. Mike's instinct screamed. Something wasn't right. He turned, and froze. Rico was behind him, holding a shank carved from a broken kitchen knife. Miss me, rookie? Rico whispered, his voice like gravel. Before Mike could move, Rico lunged. The blade sliced past his arm, not deep, but enough to draw blood. Mike stumbled back, grabbing a metal tray as a shield. Rico swung again, shouting, "You should have stayed gone." Trays crashed. Pots toppled. Hot water splashed across the floor. Guards rushed in, shouting orders, but it was too late, the kitchen was chaos again. Rico slipped on the wet floor, the knife clattering out of his hand. Mike didn't think. He kicked it away, heart pounding, gasping for air. The guards pinned Rico down, screaming, "Get him out of here." Mike stood frozen, trembling, blood dripping from his arm. Rico glared up at him as the guards dragged him away, his voice echoing down the hall. "This ain't over, Johnson. You hear me? This ain't over." The kitchen went silent again. Steam hissed. Someone mopped up the blood. Mike leaned against the wall, breathing hard. He'd survived the attack, barely. But as they patched his arm in the infirmary later, one thought burned in his mind. If Rico could reach him inside the kitchen, how far could his reach really go? The transfer and the truth behind the walls. The next morning, Mike woke up in the prison infirmary, arm bandaged, body sore, and mind spinning. The fluorescent lights above him buzzed like angry bees. A guard stood at the door, silent. When the doctor finished checking his wound, a man in a suit stepped into the room. He wasn't a guard. He wasn't a warden. He was from the state's Internal Affairs Unit, investigators who looked into misconduct behind bars. "Mr. Johnson," he said, flipping open a file. "We've been tracking incidents connected to this inmate, Rico Alvarez. You're not the first man he's targeted." Mike just stared. He didn't know what to say. The investigator continued, "Alvarez controls contraband in the kitchen, tobacco, pills, extra food. He's been running it like a business for years. The fight, the poisoning, even your transfer, all of it traces back to him." Mike finally spoke, voice quiet but shaking. "So what happens now?" The investigator sighed. "We're transferring you out. New facility. New start. You'll testify about what happened." Mike nodded slowly. He didn't feel relief. Just exhaustion. 2 days later, they woke him before sunrise, cuffed his wrists, and walked him through the same hallway he'd first entered months before. He looked around, same walls, same smell of bleach and fear, but now he saw it differently. Every face he passed told a story. Some were angry, some hollow, some just tired. And he realized something, everyone inside was fighting for something, respect, survival, power, or just a little bit of peace. As the van pulled away from the prison gates, he looked back one last time. Behind those concrete walls, men were still fighting over food, still trading fear for favors, still trapped in a system that fed on control. He wasn't innocent, he'd made mistakes that landed him there. But what he saw inside changed him forever. Weeks later, news broke that Rico Alvarez had been charged again, this time for running an illegal network inside the prison kitchen. Multiple guards were implicated. It was part of a wider investigation exposing how corruption and desperation intertwine behind bars. Mike never went back to prison. He rebuilt quietly, working in a warehouse upstate. He doesn't talk much about his time inside, except when someone glorifies prison life on social media. That's when he shakes his head and says, "Man, you don't know what it's really like. You think it's just fights and food? It's fear. It's survival. Every single day. Beyond the myths, into the slop." People on the outside think prison is just bars and orange jumpsuits, a punishment that ends when the sentence does. But for men like Mike, the real sentence isn't time. It's the memory. The fear that lingers long after release. Behind those walls, a spoon of food can start a war. A rumor can cost a life. And justice doesn't always come from the law, it comes from whoever controls the kitchen. This isn't fiction. It's not a movie. This was a true incident, verified through public records and first-hand accounts from the state investigation that followed. And as you sit down to eat tonight, remember this: for some, a simple meal isn't just dinner. It's survival. Because inside prison walls, food isn't food. It's power. And sometimes, it's the reason men die.